大家好，欢迎您来到我的频道。If you want to learn Mandarin but have very limited time, then this is the video for you. Mandarin Chinese is officially one of the hardest languages in the world for a native English speaker to learn, especially if you're trying to do it part-time. I'm currently in my final year of studying medicine at Cambridge, and I'm balancing my medical school studies with learning Chinese by myself at home in any free time that I can get. 今天我想跟你们分享一下我今年学中文的计划。现在我在剑桥读医学，所以比较忙，没有太多时间学中文。I started seriously learning Chinese just over a year ago. I've set myself some new Chinese learning goals for 2022. So in this video, I'm going to talk about exactly how I'm planning to continue making progress with my Mandarin Chinese by self-studying Mandarin Chinese from home part-time, and how you can most effectively use your time to maximize your Chinese learning efficiency. I'm going to be sharing all the resources that I'll be using and exactly how I'm going to be planning out my time. I'm on a student budget at the moment, so this is all going to be very budget friendly. All you really need to get started is a computer with an internet connection, some spare time on your hands, and a lot of motivation to stay dedicated to the goal. So as always, I've put timestamps below so you can skip ahead to the bits that interest you. I'm going to talk firstly about goal setting and how I make my plan for learning Chinese. And then I'm going to talk about how I structure my learning and how I'm going to learn vocab. And finally, I'll get into how I'm going to practice speaking and listening as well. So let's get right into the video. Firstly, it's so important to set yourself some goals and plan how you're going to learn. This has been so important for me while I've been learning Mandarin, and honestly, I think a lot of my progress is down to having a very structured plan, which I aim to follow most days. The first thing you need to think about when it comes to goal setting is why you're learning Mandarin. Write down a little list somewhere that you can look at if you're feeling demotivated or if you're not feeling excited to learn, because actually being able to learn a language and having the time and the resources to do that is a huge privilege, and I feel very lucky that I have the time and the resources to learn Mandarin Chinese. This is something I often have to remind myself of, so having this all written down somewhere, why you want to learn the language and things that excite you about the language, is super important to staying committed. Secondly, it's really important to determine your priorities when learning a language. So for me, my priorities were communicative competence in terms of speaking with people and also digital literacy, basically being able to understand any Chinese text messages or comments or any kind of Chinese websites. So that means the things that are really important for me when I'm learning are firstly being able to speak with people, which includes both actually speaking and also listening and understanding, and secondly being able to read and recognize characters. I decided to deprioritize learning writing by hand because I realized it would take me so much more time to be able to both know the vocab and learn the actual vocab itself and how to use it, and also how to handwrite it, including all the stroke order and everything. That would probably take me twice as long to make progress in Chinese, and it's not really a skill that I would necessarily use because most of the communication these days is over text and typing on a digital keyboard. So for me, as long as I can recognize characters and type them using a pinyin keyboard, that's good enough for me. And if you're not familiar with pinyin keyboards, essentially how they work is there's a standard alphabetical keyboard where you type in the pinyin for a word and a couple of suggestions for characters comes up. So obviously if you can recognize the correct character and pick it, then you can effectively type in Chinese on a laptop or a phone, which is good enough for my purposes. So if writing is something that you are really passionate about, then please do go for it. But for me personally, I realized that with the very limited time that I have, I want to focus that all on things that are really important to me in terms of my Chinese progress, which is essentially improving my communicative competence and how well I can talk to people in real life or over texting. And the third stage of planning is I have a big master Excel spreadsheet where I put all the resources that I'm using and use it to kind of track all my progress on everything. And being able to see my progress through various Anki decks or various vocab lists is really motivating, and it reminds me of how far I've come. Towards the end of the video, once I've talked a bit about all the kinds of resources I'm using, I'll put them all together and show you how I use my Excel spreadsheet to really track my progress. Of course, feel free to skip ahead if that's what you're interested in. So in terms of the actual resources and the way that I'm learning, firstly, the structure that I use is vaguely pegged to the HSK curriculum. HSK stands for 汉语水平考试, which basically means Chinese level exam. The HSK curriculum is really nicely structured, so I'm aiming I'm aiming for reaching HSK 5 level by the end of 2022. We'll see how that goes. I'm currently at HSK 4 level, so this will mean learning around 1,300 new words and being able to use them in sentences. The resources that I'm using for this are, of course, the HSK standard course books and the workbooks. Every single weekend, I'm planning to do one chapter or one workbook chapter of each of these because I'll have a little bit more time on the weekends than during the week when I'm quite busy with my medical studies. Then in terms of actually learning the vocab and improving on all of that side of things, I'm going to use 2 Anki decks. So one Anki deck to learn reading primarily and recognition of characters and kind of going through all the HSK vocab that I'll need to know. I'm going to be aiming to learn approximately 10 new characters per day. That's a little bit ambitious maybe, but I'm going to aim high and then I may reduce this down if I get quite busy, and then I'll try to amp it back up again when I have a bit more free time. So I'm not going to be too hard on myself if I don't manage to learn 10 new characters per day, but I'm going to aim for that gently. Life obviously gets in the way, especially when we're trying to learn a language part-time. To complement my Anki deck, I really like a website called MDBG, which is an online Chinese dictionary, and also Pleco, which is a great dictionary app for your phone. I also have a second Anki deck called Spoon-Fed Chinese, and this one's absolutely fantastic. It's essentially full sentences in Chinese with a native speaker reading them out, accompanied with a translation. These are really good for just soaking in the language and kind of absorbing it gradually and fairly naturally, supposedly. So I'll be doing that alongside the other Anki deck. I'll also aim for around 10 new cards per day. Next, in terms of speaking, practicing speaking is so important if you want to actually be able to have a conversation, because learning a language is all good and well in theory, but if you can't use it and you can't actually talk to someone and communicate with someone, then all of this knowledge is just locked in your head. So you've really got to practice speaking it and mobilizing it and putting sentences together and not worrying about being wrong, because at the end of the day, speaking a language is not about being perfect. It's about being able to express yourself and connect with other people. Even native speakers make mistakes all the time. That's not a problem. It's all about the communication. So I would highly recommend that you get some speaking practice in as well. It's something that I'm going to really try to carve out time for every week, and it might be a bit of a struggle, but I think it's going to be worth it. So in order to practice my speaking, I'm hoping to do a weekly chat with a native Chinese speaker for maybe around an hour or so. Obviously, it would be ideal if I could do this more often, but again, time constraints are real, and what I'm going to aim to do is, since each week I'll be doing one chapter of the HSK standard course book, I'm hoping to maybe bring a couple of things from that chapter to chat about in our weekly Chinese chat. In the past, the way that I found these native speakers to talk to is by finding them on italki or other language exchange websites, and I have a whole video actually talking about how you can find and set up the perfect language exchange. I'll add a link to that video somewhere up here in one of the corners. As an alternative to finding a language buddy, you could also find an actual teacher on italki or another website or in real life. I occasionally teach English, and I have a written down list of topics that I think are really good to talk about and really useful and applicable to lots of situations, really core language knowledge. So often I use the same topics there and bring them to my Chinese speaking sessions, and that forms a really nice springboard for a conversation that you can take anywhere else you want. Down below I'll include a link to my list of topics just in case you'd find these interesting for your own speaking practice. Finally, the last piece of the puzzle when it comes to my Chinese learning for this year is comprehensible inputs. These are so important, and they're genuinely such a good way to boost your language learning so much in a really fun and enjoyable way as well. The term comprehensible input essentially means language that you can understand and is intelligible to you. You can get the meaning, but you don't fully understand every single word or grammar structure used in it. This basically means that the overall meaning and the semantics of the phrase is clear to you, but there's just a couple of bits that you're unfamiliar with. And what this does is it helps your brain to understand how these new unfamiliar structures or words fit into the language overall, and you can naturally soak it up much faster. There are two main ways I'm planning on doing this year. The first one is listening to a podcast. In the past, I used to listen to a huge variety of Chinese learning podcasts, and that was great, but I find that when I have minimal time, it's sometimes easier to just have a go-to podcast that I can just turn on without having to worry about, oh, which one am I feeling like doing today? So this year I think I'm going to keep it simple and just focus in on listening to lots of Chinese pod because I absolutely love their stuff. They have Chinese learning podcasts for every single level of Chinese learners, from newbies, beginners, intermediates, all the way up to advanced speakers. They will often go through a dialogue and then break it down, talk about any cultural points, any new vocab. I just absolutely love their podcast. So I'm going to integrate this into my daily routine by playing this podcast every morning during my morning routine. This is a way that I can habit stack and make sure that I have no excuses to not do it. As long as I do my morning routine, I should hopefully have listened to an episode of the intermediate Chinese pod. I often find that one of my biggest excuses for skipping out on my Chinese learning for the day is I have no time. So if I stack my Chinese podcast listening time with my morning routine, I genuinely have no excuse. I put it on in the background, I brush my teeth, get dressed, all of that, and I'm hopefully soaking up some Chinese as we're going along. Of course, there are so many other great podcasts out there. Pick the one that you resonate with best and just go for it. The second form of comprehensible input that I'm going to go for this year is TV shows. So this is both really good for Chinese learning and really soaking up the sounds of the language and getting that comprehensible input. And secondly, is also really fun. On Netflix at the moment, there are so many good Mandarin speaking shows. I use a Chrome extension called Language Reactor, which was previously known as Language Learning with Netflix, but they recently rebranded. And essentially, when you watch Netflix with this extension, it pops up two sets of subtitles. One set in your target learning language, in this case Chinese, and then a smaller set below in your native language, in my case English. So there'll be both Chinese and English subtitles while the TV show is playing. And there's also functions that allow you to pause after every single sentence of the TV show just to make sure that you've understood it and just to slow it down a little bit. And this is so helpful for really understanding the TV shows and knowing exactly what they've said, because sometimes I find when I'm just watching a show in Chinese, there are some Chinese words that I miss completely. But with these subtitles, I can always pause and actually look at what the Chinese word was. If you hover over certain words or click on them, it links to kind of dictionary definitions of those words. So it's super helpful. I'll put a link in the description below. In terms of how this fits into my Chinese learning plan, I think that I don't need that much encouragement to watch more fun Chinese shows. So I'm hoping that this one will fairly naturally happen. Maybe if I'm feeling like procrastinating from some other work, then I can watch some Chinese TV as a form of productive procrastination, or just a way to relax and unwind after a busy day. I just started watching two new Mandarin shows on Netflix, one called Take My Brother Away and another one called The Rise of Phoenixes. So bringing that all together, this is my Excel master plan for this year. So as you can see at the top, I have a box with the Anki decks that I'm using, including the spoon-fed one, which is the one with full sentences, and just the HSK Vocab Anki decks, which just have the characters and what they mean. As part of my goal setting, I like to set some kind of deadline for either a review or doing some kind of test of my knowledge, or just to see where I am. So I've just completely arbitrarily given myself 222 days from today, the 7th of February 2022, to try to finish the HSK5 vocab. So as I'm currently at HSK4 level, this will be 1,300 new words and being able to read the characters and use the words fully in any context. I'll see if I can manage to do that. I think that might be a bit ambitious given that I'm still a full-time medical student and I will start working as a doctor in July, but we'll see. We can come back to this in September 2022 and see if I manage to make my goal. So on the left-hand side of the Excel sheet, I have put the number of days. So there's a countdown on the very left from 222 days and a count up next to that, which is how many days have elapsed. Then next to that, I have the date. And then in the main body of the Excel sheet, I track the number of new Anki cards that I get through each day for each of my two respective Anki decks. Then next to the number of Anki cards that I got through in a given day, I'm also tracking my HSK book curriculum progress. So that's basically whether I managed to get through any chapters of the book or get through any workbook exercises. And I'll use my spreadsheet to both plan and also track what I've managed to do. And then next to that, I'll note down any listening practice I got in the form of podcasts or TV shows. And finally, any speaking practice I got, whether I had some kind of language exchange or managed to have some kind of chat in Chinese and how that went. On another tab of the spreadsheet, I like to keep a list of all the resources and the TV shows and music and all of that stuff that I find interesting for learning Chinese, just so that there's one place that I can go and refer to all of the stuff that I have access to, and it's just nice to have it all in one place. Finally, on the very right hand side is my favourite part of the Excel spreadsheet, which is the journal part, where I write down how I'm feeling on a given day, any milestones for the day, any obstacles, any successes, and this is just really fun to look back on. So when I was learning Mandarin during my gap year, I did fill this in, and it's just a really nice record to see that there are days that go well, there are days that go not so well, but overall you're still making progress, and you can see that very clearly here with your actual measurable progress visible on the spreadsheet along with how you felt about it. And you can look back, and it's just a great reminder that even on those days when you don't feel too great, you're going to get back on it, you're going to be absolutely fine. And as long as you're going in the right direction, it doesn't matter how fast you go. To quote Confucius, it does not matter how slowly you go, so long as you do not stop. So keep it up. This is how I'm planning to learn Mandarin Chinese in the coming year. 谢谢你们收看我的视频，我希望这个视频对你有帮助。This has been a bit of a whirlwind tour through what I'm planning to do with my Chinese learning this year. I'm going to make some more videos zooming into my Mandarin learning process. If you enjoyed this video, you might like this video over here. Let me know down below what you'd like to see next. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.